Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sunday Matinee. I'm your host, Ben Stahl. We are in episode 39. Joining me this week is Travis Martinez. Travis, welcome back.
Good to be back.
So we're going to be talking about some comic book movies here, specifically one, but that's kind of becoming a thing for Travis at this point, I think, because Spider-Man was his last episode, and well, between the two of us, we're both pretty huge comic book nerds, so
Yeah.
this should be a good one. But before we get into the main topic, of course, got some news bites here. So not surprisingly, I picked out a couple comic book ones for this episode as well. But one of the big bits of news that dropped on Friday was that Free Guy and the Adam Project director Sean Levy is officially in talks to direct Deadpool 3. This is great. You know, he directed Ryan Reynolds in both Free Guy and the Adam Project, so they have a good working relationship. And Free Guy's humor, I think, is you know exactly the kind of thing that we can throw into Deadpool. So I think this could be a really good match. Travis, what do you think?
I think it could be a good match. I have yet to see the new one, but I did see Free Guy, and I felt like it had that humor that Deadpool had. So I think it could be an interesting mashup. I think it too, considering it might also enter the MCU, I feel like that kind of comedy style could help it to transition a little bit into that universe, at least initially. I still want it to be R-rated, of course. If you're gonna make a PG-13 Deadpool, I'm not watching.
Yeah, Deadpool has earned its status as the R-rated Marvel project, so I hope it's able to maintain that. It could be a while before we see Deadpool 3 because I know that Sean Levy's currently working on one other project, and he's also an executive producer for Stranger Things, which is about to enter its fourth season. So it could be a little bit before we see Deadpool 3, but this is still good news.
Yeah. It may be a while before Deadpool 3, but I think we're getting close to maybe seeing an appearance from Deadpool in the MCU. Because did you see that leaked concept art, which was supposed to feature Deadpool and Shang-Chi?
I didn't see the concept art. I heard about it, though. And
yeah,
at this rate, he could show up in almost any movie.
And now he's like the new Andrew Garfield, because Ryan Reynolds I'm not playing Deadpool in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. So it's a matter of is he going to make an appearance?
I know that one is going to be potentially chock full of crazy cameos that I'm not prepared for.
It's like Captain America Civil War. It's just Avengers 4.5 at this point with all the characters.
Yep. So yeah, Deadpool. I mean, it's also just a good sign that Deadpool 3 is a thing that's going to happen, because we've been waiting on it it'll be 4 years now since Deadpool 2 came out this summer. So yeah. In more Disney-related news, the Obi-Wan Kenobi trailer finally dropped after so many months of waiting, and we're only about 2 months away from it landing. So,
are we? Is it May? I thought it was coming out this month.
No. Obi-Wan's is a summer release. It's either May or June. I can't remember exactly which. Because we're getting Moon Knight at the end of the month. That's the big Disney Plus one. I'm excited, but on the other hand, it's the trailer didn't do that much for me. It did kind of confirm a fear that we had on the Book of Boba Fett podcast, and that's we're going to be seeing more Tatooine.
Yeah.
But we're also going to be seeing other places, which is nice.
Yeah. It's just like you said, Book of Boba Fett has me weary on it, but I'm interested in seeing how it goes.
So, on the plus side, it is good to see Ewan McGregor back. He was one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy. So, he has, at this point, he's pretty much solidified himself as, I think, the all-time Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, moving over to Warner Brothers, the studio we're going to be talking about here in just a minute, they actually delayed several of their films, including some of their future DC projects, into 2023, those being Aquaman and The Flash. And I know The Flash was supposed to be probably their most high-profile release of the year because it's sort of their big multiverse movie.
Yeah.
And they also delayed Black Adam from July to October. But they moved up Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which I'm excited about because Shazam is one of my favorite of the DCEU films, and I'm really excited to see where they go with that. Mm-hmm. So that should be good. That should be fun. And finally, in again Warner Brothers news, Florence Pugh and Austin Butler, who is playing Elvis in the upcoming biopic Elvis, are set to join the cast of Dune 2. I still haven't seen Dune. I'm a bad sci-fi fan right now. Yeah. Have you seen Dune yet?
No, it's not something that really interested me. You know, it's just one of those like franchises that I'm just like, you know.
I read the book in high school, and like it didn't blow me away the way it does with a lot of people. So, you know, I'll see it eventually. I like a lot of the cast in it, and it's sci-fi, so it'll eventually happen. Yeah. But it wasn't like the Spider-Man for last year. It wasn't something I had to go out and see. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's kind of it for the news. So let's talk a minute about if we've been watching anything this week. I'll just kick it off. I haven't watched too much. Just this week I've been doing a lot of work putting together my sound booth and just cleaning up stuff. So I put on The Nice Guys, which is a sort of crime film with Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling, sort of crime comedy in the same vein, sort of the spiritual sequel to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang for anyone who's seen that. But it's just a fun little film. Very witty, very clever. It's from writer-director Shane Black, who directed Iron Man 3. And also, of course, wrote the original Lethal Weapon. And then I also, just in the background this week, put on The Spy Who Loved Me, just some classic Bond, just to have something nice on the background. Not much in the way of watching anything new or spectacular this week. Have you been catching up on anything, watching it? Anything you want to recommend?
No. The last few weeks I've been like doing a show, as you know, like in community theater. So, it's mostly just been focusing on that. And then when I'm home, I just want to relax, lay back. Mostly just been watching some older comfort stuff. I like rewatched the first couple Shrek movies for the first time in years. But there is one thing I checked out that is actually very interesting, a documentary called Doom, The Untold Story of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, which is a very interesting documentary detailing the history of that movie and all that. Because comic book fans are aware of that movie, but most didn't, because it's like officially unreleased and there's like so much stuff. But that documentary gave a lot of insight, and you could tell the actors were passionate. Like I wish like they at least got the chance for that film to be seen mass release. Really, I can't speak right now. I highly recommend checking it out. It's very interesting and gives a lot of insights on that movie, and actually enhances your viewing of it, because I rewatched the movie right after, and I'm just like, wow, this is actually better than the last time I saw it, knowing all this information they gave in it.
Yeah, sometimes those weird little films that fly under the radar of the general population, like what happens to make those films is sometimes it's more fascinating than the film itself, and that sounds like one of those stories.
Well, yeah, because like the film was never intended to be released; it was only made to keep the rights to the Fantastic Four. But the actors and all the people, like, they were unaware. They thought they were making a film that was going to be released to the public in theaters and all that, to the point where actors went out of their way, paying out of their pockets to go to Comic-Con, promote the film, do screenings and all that, only for them to get a cease and desist order later on.
And I know they make fun of that in Arrested Development at one point. Yeah. And it's like,
but yeah, I mean, but it also, like I said, it gives a lot of insight, because they even pointed out like the contract only stated they had to start production on a movie by a certain time, that they could have just started production and then stopped it, but they went through the whole process of making it, which was more expensive, which also raised a lot of questions that really makes you think about that movie. Like, was it intended to be released? Because that was also around the time, I believe, 20th Century Fox or whoever bought it from them. And that's around when they felt like it was starting to get buried under the rug.
Yeah, the way that film rights work with all these kind of different intellectual properties is so weird. It's it's the reason that Fox was able to hold on to so many of the Marvel properties for so long while they had them.
Yep. That's why Sony still owns Spider-Man.
Yep. All they have to do in a couple of years is just make another movie.
Yep.
Doesn't even have to connect back to the MCU. Doesn't have to be. They can just start anything they want. So, yeah, it's interesting. So, yeah, it's time to talk about the Batman. So, I'm just going to start with a brief history of how this movie came to be, because it's very, very interesting. This is not the movie that was originally announced back in the day. Warner Brothers had originally slated this Batman film to be written and directed by Ben Affleck and carry on the story of his Bruce Wayne, who had been introduced in Batman versus Superman, and had set up a sort of storyline potentially pitting him against Deathstroke at the end of Justice League. But given just Affleck, just sort of his interest in the film just continued to wane as the problems with Justice League continued. And first he dropped out as the director. He wanted to focus just on the script and on the performance. And so Warner Brothers brought in Matt Reeves. I got really excited at that point because Matt Reeves had directed Cloverfield, Let Me In, and the last two Planet of the Apes films, which were all very good. So they brought in a solid director. And then Reeves read Affleck's script, really liked it, but he said, if I'm going to direct this film, I need to do this my way, and started from scratch. And then at that point, Affleck dropped out, and we got this whole new concept of, hey, we're going to make a Batman film outside of the established timeline we've created, which was kind of a bold move considering that, you know, DC has been trying really hard to hit that point where they're on the same level as Marvel. And Marvel, all of their sort of side projects that don't necessarily connect back to the MCU are usually just like little TV shows that they'll drop on Hulu, stuff like MODOK, which is clearly a very different thing. So this was a kind of a big deal, and I think to some degree it may have confused some people who were expecting the Affleck storyline to continue. But this is what we got. We got Robert Pattinson, we got Matt Reeves, we got a whole new start. It was a little disconcerting because, of course, this is like the third time, you know, this century, you know, in the last 20 years that Batman's been rebooted. It's getting to that point where it's like, man, how many times this is going to happen? Kind of the same thing with Spider-Man over at Marvel. But it happened. And now I want to know just your gut reactions. What did you think of this film?
I genuinely liked it. Like, I will preface this by saying that, like, while I do love superheroes, DC, Marvel, and all that, I don't have as strong of a connection with Batman as I do other characters. Because as you said, like, this is like the third reboot in like 20 years that it's like it's starting to get oversaturated with Batman, in my opinion. But I went in like with no real expectations on it, other than like it should at least be a decent film because, like you said, Matt Reeves directed it, and I loved what he did with Planet of the Apes. So, and I thought it was like a really, really well done Batman story. Like, I genuinely didn't know where a lot of it was going, which is like something nice and to see in movies nowadays, is all the twists and turns and all that. And a few problems here and there, but nothing that really deterred me from liking the film overall.
Yeah, I have when I asked the question, what didn't work, I struggled to come up with something that like didn't work for me. You know, there might be a few nitpicky things, but most of what I'm going to be more critical of is how the story continues going forward, which we'll talk about more towards the end, because I think they had a really strong foundation, and I hope they follow through with connecting it to the next film. But I loved how just, you know, DC gets get some flack for this sometimes compared to Marvel, but I really loved how dark this film was.
Yeah.
Without crossing over into R-rated territory.
Mm-hmm.
It easily could have. I thought the performances were great. Going back to, I think it's personally my favorite iteration of Gotham City.
Yeah.
Chris Nolan's felt too alive.
Yeah. For me, Chris Nolan's, it just felt like a generic city. It didn't really have a personality to it, you know?
Yeah. This definitely felt like it inherited a little bit of the Gotham of the Tim Burton era without being too Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Because Tim Burton definitely has that unique flair to him.
Yeah.
But this felt like that, but definitely more grounded.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you on a lot of that. I felt like this film did things better than other Batman films have done that I forgot to mention. It's like one problem I've had with most Batman films, it's like the directors just doing their version of Batman as opposed to just telling a good Batman story. Because I love a lot of the previous Batman films, but you can tell like it's Tim Burton's Batman, it's Joel Schumacher's Batman, it's Christopher Nolan's Batman, it's Zack Snyder's Batman. But this one felt like it was just trying to make a Batman movie that, in the same vein as like Batman the Animated Series or the Arkham games or something like that. It wasn't trying to do too much to change it to fit their own personal style, if you know what I mean. And one of my favorite aspects of the film actually is something that most of the Batman films have either blatantly ignored or barely touched upon was Batman's rule of no killing people. Because it always just bothers me how like most of the Batman have just been very open about like people dying and all that. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, this film, and you can make the argument that during the car chase scene there could have been civilian casualties, but you can also see that Batman is doing the best he can to avoid collateral damage. Even when he's
and even then with that car chase, it was the Penguin doing it, and like Batman can't really do too much to really stop it. So he's trying to stop the Penguin to prevent further damage and all that. But yeah, I think it was a nice touch to finally address that, like, and actually it be a very big thing in this movie. Because I think the closest before this, like, was actually, believe it or not, Batman Forever, where like Batman was trying to convince Robin, like, like if you kill somebody, you're going to go down a dark path you're not going to like. And only hinted at here and there in like the Christopher Nolan films and all of that.
Yeah, it's surprising given how just dark the tone of this film is. Because I think another thing that they touch on in this film that they hint at more in other films is Batman. One of Batman's greatest weapons is fear. And just in one of the early scenes in the film where he, confronts the muggers, like just him emerging from the shadows is, it's terrifying. It's one of the scariest moments in a Batman film. And it's no wonder that, that the mugging victim is also scared of him, because that's not who you want to come save you.
No.
You want Superman to come flying in.
Yeah. There's a couple things I want to add to this, but like I'll wait for later because I saw on the itinerary something that can really add to this point.
So yeah, I love that the film addresses that. I love how dark it is, and this is again normally something I might complain about in a film, but I just also love that this film is just, it's always dark in Gotham. Again, that's something I like about this Gotham. There's nary a sunny day. It's just this bleak city, and it's no wonder at the end Selina says it's never going to change. This place is terrible.
Yeah.
I want to jump right into the next topic because I think we're kind of going to hit this point really soon. This, for everyone who's sitting out there can say this is the Batman. This is not the same type of story we've seen where you get to see a lot of what Bruce Wayne's home life is. You don't see him running Wayne Enterprises. For the absolute majority of this film, which is shocking given the direction Marvel tends to take with their characters, showing their faces out of costume so much, he's in that costume for well over half of his screen time. Probably the longest scene of him out of the costume is probably at the funeral. It's either that or when he goes to confront Falcone towards the end of the film. But even when he's out of costume, he's not doing Bruce Wayne stuff. He's he's doing Batman stuff. He's in the Batcave. He's checking out, like, I need to, analyze this picture I took. I need to come up with a plan. Or he's out on his motorcycle, just bundled up so that people still don't recognize him, but that he's still not in his suit. So he's almost always doing Batman stuff, which is crazy to me because this film is nearly 3 hours and none of it gets bogged down in Bruce Wayne Playboy stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's crazy.
Yeah, I thought that was very nice, that because, like you said, like, very few comic book movies will have them in costume throughout the most of the movie. There's only like maybe a few exceptions because, like, costumes are expensive and uncomfortable. That it's nice to really see that, and I do like the route that they were going. That, like, he's not Bruce Wayne. Batman's his true persona. So seeing a film that actually focused on him having to learn that he needs that alter ego, that he can still do good outside of the suit, like he needs both aspects of it, I thought was a very nice way to really go with it.
And Selena drives home that point at the end of the film. She says, your mask, this isn't your mask. Your mask is whoever you are underneath. And they try to drive that point home in, like, almost every other, particularly in the Christopher Nolan Batman films. It's like, oh, you're so stuck being Batman that you're not Bruce Wayne. It's like, this Batman really is that.
Yeah.
Like, even Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne got to do Bruce Wayne stuff. He got to try and have a life. This Batman is clearly the most dedicated to being Batman, and I find that fascinating, an interesting take, because I hope it's not something they do going forward, because eventually we're going to have to see a little bit more of Bruce Wayne. And I think this kind of ties to the end, so I'll save it for a little bit. But going forward, I think Bruce Wayne is going to have to be more Bruce Wayne. But I still think that he really this is the Batman, not Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of Bruce Wayne, when Robert Pattinson was first announced as the Batman, oh boy, was it met with controversy from a lot of people, because a lot of people out there really only knew Robert Pattinson from the Twilight films, which, there's some wonderful diehard Twilight fans out there who were probably very excited when this happened. And there were a lot of people who don't like those movies who were just absolutely furious. And then there's I don't know where you stand, but then you've got, from where I sit, I was looking at the films that Pattinson had done post Twilight, most of which I still haven't seen, but I've seen The Lighthouse, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the last few years. And just seeing him, and that was like, I'm all in. Like, he's a great actor. Sometimes you get stuck with, starting your career off doing something like Twilight, which, again, Twilight fans, good for you. I saw the first one and thought it was not great. But what was your reaction when Robert Pattinson was cast?
So when he was initially cast, I was one of those people who's like, oh, the guy from Twilight, and was a little taken aback by it. But I stepped back and thought of two things. Like you said, he's done other things. You can't judge an actor based on one single role. Because, like, even, for example, the one that comes to my mind is, like, Robin Williams starred in the Popeye movie, and that nearly destroyed his career, and that was his first movie ever. And so you can't judge anybody by that. So I know, like, he did other stuff that, like, can show he can do the role. But the second thing that came to my mind is, like, who cares who's playing Batman? In a few years, they're going to reboot it anyway. Every actor's going to play Batman at some point. That it's just like, all right, here's another Batman. Let's see what they do. See if we can enjoy it or not. So yeah, for me, it was just like I said, like this is why I just had a hard time connecting with Batman because there's just too many Batman at this point.
Yeah, Batman is kind of the James Bond of comic book characters.
Yeah,
He's
I mean, he
bigger
was like,
than the role, than
yeah,
the actor playing him.
yeah. I mean, he's like Warner Brothers, like big DC character. I mean, for the longest time, it was either Batman or Superman movies. Before this whole boom, it's just like you never really saw any other comic book characters from DC and Warner Brothers like get their own standalone movies. Because I was thinking about it, I'm like, I think Batman's in like 12 live action big budget movies. That off the top of my head, and I don't even think that's including his appearance in Suicide Squad and all that. So it's just like you just get oversaturated at a point, and so that's why I was just like, I don't really care, like. Let's see what they do with it and see where it goes. And if we don't like it, like I said, DC was gonna would reboot it in a few years, and you'll get another actor.
Yep, that's actually a good point. Is no matter what, no matter if this is successful or if it's a failure, and all signs point to it being a massive success. Like Robert Pattinson will fulfill his contract. He'll either keep going like Robert Downey Jr. did, or but even when Robert Pattinson's done, they'll keep Batman coming back because there's just something iconic about Batman.
I mean, that's literally what you were saying at the beginning. It's like Robert Pattinson did that with Ben Affleck. He didn't want to come and do it again. They just got another actor. And when Pattinson doesn't want to do it, they'll get another actor. When that person doesn't want to do it, they'll get another actor. Batman's like one of their big cash cows that they don't want to keep out of theaters for too long.
And it's important. I think it's important to point out too with these Robert Pattinson films, apart from Twilight, is another reason that people, were probably had that sort of reaction is all these films that he's had been in that have been getting good reviews. They're all independent films. They're all very under the radar, in and out of theaters in a week. So this is like the first chance for a lot of audiences to really see him outside of Twilight. So, and I'm really glad you took it because he is spectacular in the role.
He is. I mean, honestly, he's probably one of my favorite Batman voices, at least, which is something very few actors can get right.
Yeah, I appreciated that. I could tell he was doing a voice, but it wasn't like it didn't feel forced the way that Bale's sometimes does. Like, man, how Christian Bale made it through all three of those movies without losing his voice is.
Oh, he did on on a lot of days, they said. And then it's just like Ben Affleck, you haven't used like a machine or something that modulated his voice, which is just cheating in my opinion.
And just kind of going back a little bit, keeping with the sort of dark tone, I also I love, again, this film doesn't go into like that level of R-rated violence, but holy crap, when he's running through hallways and taking all that gunfire, it's like, oh my gosh, he's clearly got the most armored bat suit of all time. Like, crazy. We've come a long way from Christopher Nolan's films where he was like, I need my suit to be more mobile and it needs to be able to block knives. And it's like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, man, we're on a whole new level here.
Yeah. And I also appreciated as much that they use as much practical effects as they could with like fight scenes and like a lot of stuff. Because a lot of comic book movies nowadays are oversaturated with CGI for like, especially the climax, third act or whatever. But here it was only used for like scenes that they needed it for. And a lot of like the hand-to-hand stuff and like other action scenes were just the actors on set doing as much as they could.
I think that's actually a perfect transition into sort of the next topic, and that's how we would compare this to previous cinematic iterations of Batman, because they didn't need a lot of computer effects for this film because they were telling a very grounded story. And it's so funny looking back. In 2005, we were all like, "Oh, Batman Begins! It's great because it's so grounded and feels so real." And then the movies go on, and they still feel like they exist in sort of a realish world. But this like took everything away that made those films that made those films their world. Like, gone are the uber gadgets that Batman has. He's really relying on his intelligence and just the most basic real world type of gadgets to be able to scale buildings. And well, actually, that's not true. He has that really cool contact lens with the camera in it. There's no way that's but other than that, like, he's not, he doesn't have this big old bat computer, at Wayne Enterprises. The Batmobile is just, a tricked out muscle car. It's not this military grade tumbler, and it's not the Tim Burton like weird supercar. Yeah. So it's just this grounded, sort of true to life type of Batman. And I really appreciate that. And not to belittle the works of Burton and Nolan, maybe a little to Schumacher, because his films are cartoonishly ridiculous. But this is sort of like, it really is. You said it perfectly. This is the most like the comics it has felt on screen. I think you've already sort of expressed this, but is this your favorite iteration of the character?
I would say, yeah, like, at least live action wise, because like I said, a lot of the previous stuff have always been like directors taking their own spin on it. This was like one of the first times where like it felt like you were watching a live action Arkham game or whatever, something that really like wanted to be a true Batman story. And I appreciate stuff that they did a little differently, because like Batman has always been, even he has no powers, like he's always been like so like OP to the point to where it's like a running joke, like Batman can do whatever he wants just because he's Batman. So seeing this version, actually, like, he's only been Batman for 2 years. He's still learning. He's still like making mistakes. He's still trying to get into that flow of things. I felt was very nice to see. And I do appreciate, like, they really also, like, not only emphasizing like the Batman doesn't kill rule, which is like, thank you, finally somebody does that, because like Batman doesn't want to be the guy who murdered his parents. He doesn't want to be that person. But I also appreciate, like, it really also emphasized the fact that Batman is a detective. You don't really get too much of that from a lot of the previous Batman films. Yeah, he's figured out like problems and done some detective stuff, but this is like a true like noir. Batman is like figuring out puzzles and like trying to combat somebody who's on the equal level of intelligence as he is, or even possibly a greater level of intelligence than he is.
I love that you bring up detective, because you're right. I think they go a little bit into the Dark Knight, in the scene where that no one understands, where he's trying to like do the thing with the bullet, and everyone's like, I don't get that scene, and we all just roll along with it anyway. But
yeah,
this is like really the first time you get to see him like inspecting crime scenes. And I do love that you point out this is year 2. We don't have to see. You don't need to see him meeting Jim Gordon. They already have that pre-established relationship. There's so much about Batman that audiences already know. We don't need to see a lot of the origin stuff. Yeah.
And while it's probably my favorite live action, like I said, there are some problems. Like, I will admit, I felt like Penguin could have been cut out and it wouldn't have affected it too much, but that just felt like it was just there to set up the Penguin HBO Max series that they want to do. That's like the only real major thing I had was like, I felt like he was just there for that sake. I don't know if you agree or if you felt like something a little bit different.
I don't mind that the Penguin wasn't a huge focus of the film, because, they're doing that series. But also, I have a feeling that, he's very obviously going to come back in sort of his true form.
That I'm looking forward to. I just felt like maybe like give him a little bit more significance, but I didn't want them to focus too much on him because like you already got Catwoman, Riddler, introducing a new Batman, and the connection with him and Gordon and him and Alfred and all that. That it could have been like Batman and Robin or Spider-Man 3 all over again with too many characters.
Yeah.
Even though it's 3 hours long, you can only do so much with that time.
For me, and I guess this goes back a little bit earlier in what we were talking about, but for me, one of the only things that I'm not sure how I feel about it yet is just the Batman Catwoman romance. It's kind of like she doesn't know he's Bruce, which is one of the things about Batman Returns and Dark Knight Rises that help make that romance work is her realizing, oh my gosh, he's a billionaire, but he's also trying to help everybody. He's someone who, I can connect with. And it's like in this instance, it's like he's just some guy who beats up people and throws them in jail.
Yeah, that did feel a little out of nowhere for me. I honestly thought they were just going to set it up like something that they would focus on here and there throughout the series, and then we'd see a romance blossom. I didn't really get that much from just this film alone.
And I do hope they bring her back.
I do
because
too.
That's one of the things about jumping from Batman Returns into the Joel Schumacher movies. It's like they had Catwoman and they could have brought her back, and she was already a great character. Michelle Pfeiffer was wonderful, and they wasted that opportunity. So, I hope she comes back in one of the next couple of films. I right now, I wouldn't necessarily say this is my favorite iteration of the live action Batman on screen, but that's only because I want to know what happens next. This is it's probably my favorite first Batman film between this Batman and Batman Begins. But what Nolan's trilogy has that right now this series doesn't was it had The Dark Knight, which is it's really tough to argue that anyone is ever going to be a greater comic book villain on screen than Heath Ledger's Joker. But we don't know that yet. This next film, next couple films, they could bring in someone who just absolutely blows us away. And Paul Dano was actually really good too.
Yeah, because I was even going to say, like, saying who the best comic book villain is always subjective. What characters are your favorite? What's the best interpretation of it? I still personally love Heath Ledger's Joker probably the most out of all the Batman villains. But like you said, like the Riddler in this is pretty amazing. Like they did a really good job with the character in this.
Yeah, there's something really unsettling about the Riddler in this film, just because the Riddler's ultimate endgame is vengeance, the way Batman's is, but he's distorted it in such a disgusting way that he thinks, that all politicians, all leaders are inherently corrupt, and the only way to cleanse Gotham is to wipe it out and start fresh. And it's a really great he makes a really great foil to Batman, because you get to the end, Batman realizes vengeance may not be should not be my ultimate end game, because vengeance can be twisted into something evil. Justice is different from vengeance. And there's something that also just feels really eerie about a villain who spends most of their time behind as we talk right now, behind a camera, in a mask. It echoes that scene in The Dark Knight where the Joker takes the hostage and he's broadcasting it, over the internet. It's like it just takes that scene and makes that the entire villain, and it's like that works.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. Like, it was very interesting to see the parallels that they made between Riddler and Batman and all that. And because I think they hinted at this in another film where like Batman has inspired some of the villains. I can't think of any at the top of my head, but like seeing it be like a main focal point in this was very interesting. Getting perspectives on stuff. Like I think one of my favorite parts was just the Riddler being like, "I'm an orphan too, but nobody cared about me because I wasn't some rich billionaire," which is like that's some good social commentary on like how the world views stuff like this. Like where people put their focus and attention versus where maybe it should really go at the moment.
Yeah. Not to get too political on the show, but I think a perfect parallel to that right now is we are so focused on the conflict in Ukraine, and there are people out there who are pointing out very validly that we don't, as a nation, we don't tend to have that same level of empathy when there's conflicts like this in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's absolutely right, because we also live in a society where our eyes are always fixed on our television screens on, the super wealthy, the rich, the famous people. And so we as a society feel empathy when, someone we all know, even though we don't know them personally, has a struggle, has a conflict, there's a death. We as a society, we band together to mourn, because we can all empathize with each other that way. But when it's just a normal person, blue white collar worker, we just it doesn't hit the same, and it's sad.
Yeah, it's like the same thing in the Joaquin Phoenix Joker, like a lot of the same elements there, with like the whole like people were disgusted he murdered somebody, and he pointed out where like, oh please, if it was me, you would just walk over my dead body or something like that. I can't remember the line exactly, but I'm, this what I'm talking about.
I do. I've only seen it once, and I know I'm gonna get sticks and stones thrown at me here, but I was not a huge fan of that movie. I get what it was trying to do, but I think the Batman actually does it better.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great foil, and he's just so creepy, and also reflects that sort of scary real world charisma where that kind of person can amass followers who believe in that same philosophy. That's something, again, we see in the real world.
It gave me very much a cult vibe, with like all those groups who will like, I'm part of this cause that, like they don't realize is like something that's ultimately going to hurt them or other people worse than it's going to do good.
Yeah, it's something. And it reminds me of another theme about this movie that I wanted to touch on earlier, is that one of the reasons this film feels dark, again, without going into that super dark R-rated territory, is that there's very little humor in it. And that also separates it from previous iterations. The Tim Burton films obviously have that Tim Burton brand of humor. Christopher Nolan's films have Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine to, lighten the load for us when it starts to get dark, especially Michael Caine, who just covers the entire human range of emotions in those films, but is the comic relief when he needs to be. This film doesn't have the comic relief at all. There's Andy Serkis is, again, the human connection to Batman, but he doesn't. He's not sitting on a yacht with supermodels while Bruce Wayne is planning his elaborate, break-in into the tower. He's just there to support him. And Andy Serkis just was so good at that.
He was. And I think even the Penguin had his few funny lines here and there, but they were always just like quick little things here and there. I think my favorite was just like how he thought he killed Batman in the car chase scene, and he got super excited about it, only for him to jump out of the flames and Penguin realized it's just like, oh. Like I laughed so hard at that scene, not even gonna lie. That was too funny.
Actually, and then again, I guess the other really funny moment, again, is a Penguin moment, is where Batman and Gordon leave him tied up,
Yeah.
and just has to sort of I can't remember where I read this, but someone pointed out he literally has to waddle like a penguin to to get away, and it's
I
like,
never thought of that.
oh, yeah, it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah. And not to just keep bringing up all of his funny moments, but I also love the part where, spoiler warning, I guess, where like
we're in Spoilercast, we're good.
I know, but still, I don't want somebody in the comments, oh, I didn't see it yet or whatever, because people will be like that. When he confronts Falcone and he's about to pull out his gun, and then Riddler shoots him, and then they tackle Penguin thing, and it's him. He's like, I never fired. Like, that was also kind of funny in my opinion.
Oh yeah. I want to move on here to the score of this film. Michael Giacchino's theme for this. One of the reasons that this movie is as dark as it is Batman's theme, which is literally like, it is a horror theme, completely different from what we're used to. And I think it does a perfect job defining the tone of the film. And like Danny Elfman's score for Batman and Batman Returns, like, defined those films. It's a very fun, adventurous type of theme. And then James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer came up with the very just that like, it was the defining Batman theme for 10 years.
Yeah. The Dark Knight one, the
one,
yeah.
But and again, it's definitely meant to drum up excitement in the audience. This one, again, it's dread, it's fear, it's vengeance. And if I was to pick between the three, purely based on the fact that I'm such a fan of classic horror films, I kind of lean on this one just because it's so different. But it's also it's so hard to deny how iconic the Danny Elfman score is. It was so iconic that they brought it back for the animated series.
Yeah,
you can't deny it, how much of an influence it had.
Exactly.
So tough to say which is my favorite, but I would probably have to say the Elfman one, just because the Batman animated series was a big part of my childhood.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on a lot of that. I'm glad you brought up like the horror of it, because I think I even remember Matt Reeves talking about like, this is supposed to be like a horror movie. And when watching it, I'm thinking to myself, the horror isn't towards the audience. The horror is towards the villains and all these like criminals, like when they confront Batman or are scared of him. Because like you said, the film opens up with like criminals throughout the city seeing the bat signal and so scared, like they stop what they're doing, or they are just so frozen in place, just so scared of like the encounter with him. And I think like one of the moments that emphasizes it, we talk about this scene a lot in here because probably just the best scene, is like the car chase scene. Like when the theme goes, when the Batmobile is going through the fire, and then like seeing Batman get out of the car and walk towards the Penguin, and you see Penguin's perspective of it, like upside down as he walking. You feel the fear that Penguin has in that scene. So I agree with you. I think like for if I'm going best, this one I feel like does its job better. Like again, Danny Elfman's score, classic. You said it was used in the animated series. It was used in the Lego Batman video game. It's the Batman theme, similar to the original like Superman theme is the Superman theme.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. But this one I think does what it's trying to do the best, and I do like how it is. And then the Christopher Nolan one it fit its thing best with like the whole tactical sense of it all. But this one I feel like really wowed me, and like if this score doesn't at least get an Oscar nomination, I'm going to be upset, because like he really put his all into it.
I also just want to point out here, this is, I can't even count at this point. This has got to be like Michael Giacchino's like fourth or fifth like superhero score, because he did Doctor Strange 1 and
Mhm.
I think he did it Spider-Man 1 and 3 at least. I don't know if he did
I
Far
think.
From Home, but he definitely did No Way Home.
Oh, you're talking about Tom and Holland's
Yeah,
Spider-Man.
the
I thought
Tom
you
Holland Spider-Man films. Yeah.
when you said
Yeah.
Spider-Man 1 and 3, I'm like, Danny Elfman did the Tobey Maguire
Yes.
Spider-Man
Yes, he did.
movies. I got confused there for a sec. And
So
didn't he do
yeah.
The Incredibles too, or am I mixing him up
Yeah,
with
he
somebody
did.
else?
He did. That was yeah. Well before this big superhero boom, he did the Incredibles score.
Yeah.
So he's slowly becoming like the go-to superhero composer.
And he does a really good job because, like, looking at all those films, they're all so distinct, but they fit what the film needs to do.
And I think uh, I think this and Doctor Strange are my favorite scores of his.
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man ones are great, but they also, particularly Far From Home, integrate so much of the movies that came before it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably his most distinctive, again, because it's so different from what we expect
Yeah.
from a superhero film. Uh, um, so we've talked a little bit about how this is Batman Year 2, and we've foregone a
Yep.
lot of the origin materials, but this film still does address Thomas and Martha Wayne, and I think it does it in a very interesting way by actually integrating them into the modern story of what's being told, of how what Thomas Wayne did in the past has an effect on what we're seeing now. The sins of the father shall be, I don't know what the phrase is, shall be
Yeah.
brought upon the son or something like that.
I don't either. I don't know.
But I appreciate so much that this film went the same route as Spider-Man Homecoming and didn't force its audience to once again revisit the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne on screen. Because even if you haven't seen a Batman film, it's just a part of his story that we all know. We don't need to see it told before us again. It's fine that they reference it. It's fine that they integrate it into, the story that's being told now. But I also just think I like the way they integrate it because it's important. It's his parents are somehow his parents are more important in this film, despite never appearing in it live. They shape his life so much more in this story, because he takes those lessons that the stories of his father they never knew, and he takes those lessons to heart by the end of the film, and understands that we're all capable of doing the wrong thing for the best, with the best intentions.
Yeah. And yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, honestly, because like I always find it funny that people always complain about Uncle Ben's death in Spider-Man, even though we only saw it like twice at this point in 15 years. But we see Thomas and Martha Wayne dying like 5 times a year in video games, cartoons, and every single film that has come out. It's just like we see it so often that it's refreshing that they do it in a new way where it's not just like, oh, they died and that's his motivation. Like actually seeing like it connect with a lot of the themes and challenges he's going through now, and even questioning like, who are these people? They're not like the people I thought I knew, because like he thinks like they did so many bad things and all of that. And like you said, connecting to the whole like doing the right things or doing the wrong things for the right reasons type of theme, because like that's one of the big things Batman has been dealing with this movie, is like seeing how like his actions cause other bad things because he's inspiring people in the wrong way. And so I thought it was like super nice for them to do that. I also love the little Easter egg. I don't know if they've done this before, but I love the Easter egg that Martha Wayne's maiden name was Arkham. That was like a nice little touch. Because when they said that, I'm like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's a good connection, because Arkham, obviously a well-known name among, the Batman franchise.
And even seeing that Martha had like some mental issues, and maybe that's how it connects, because like Arkham's not a prison, it's a mental asylum in the comics and all of the established lore.
I appreciate that, this goes just along with what we've been talking about is, once again, the Riddler is the one who finds all this out. Mm-hmm. But because he doesn't know all of the facts, he just misinterprets it as Thomas Wayne was one of the corrupt. Mm-hmm. He didn't know that, Thomas Wayne's not the one who siphoned all of this money off to the criminal underworld, who's funding all of this. It's like, no, it's because he had to, he had to try to save his wife or not save, but, he tried to, get his wife's name out of the newspapers, and he just
protect her.
Yes, that's the perfect word, and just went about it in the wrong way. So,
yeah, because that also adds to another thing that I talk about, like, you never know all the details of stuff. That's why there's such thing as due process. That's why Batman also doesn't kill people, because, like, you never know what somebody's going through. If you want a film that really tackles that very issue, is like watch Dredd with Carl Urban, because that also shows how like people can do wrong things, but they may not have a choice, or they may think that they're doing what's right for them in the moment. So that was also nice, because like, especially when he went to Alfred, and he was the one who told him everything, because nobody knew Thomas better than Alfred himself.
And I'm just going to right now appreciate that shout out to Dredd. That is an excellent film that more people need to see.
It's such a good movie. I love it so much. Wish it got a sequel.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the end of the film, because the end of the film has a bit of a surprise cameo that was officially confirmed by Matt Reeves. So at the end of the film, the Riddler is in Arkham. He is just bemoaning, just his plan has failed, and he hears a voice in the next cell over, reassuring him that this is only the beginning, and it is Barry Keoghan, who comic book fans are going to recognize as Druig from the Eternals. You barely get to see his face in this film, but what little you see, it's like the first thought is this the Joker? And Matt Reeves has said that yes, this is in fact the Joker, and has even said that they had filmed additional scenes with him, featuring Batman going to Arkham, because he wanted to put together a profile of the Riddler, and so he wanted to study what other criminals thought.
Very Hannibal Lecter-like scene.
So I'm okay with them cutting that out of the film. Ultimately, I'm sure it'll end up, on bonus features, or it'll just end up getting onto YouTube by the time the film's released.
Yep.
But I appreciate that they kept it very secretive by saying that Keoghan was playing a GCPD officer in the film, and faking that they were, like filming scenes with him doing that. They did. I'm going to jump into some No Way Home spoilers here. So if you haven't seen that, maybe stop for a second. They did a better job at keeping that a secret than Marvel and Sony could anything that happened in No Way Home. I love No Way Home, but it over the months before release, it just became so much obvious. Like, okay, Molina's in it, Defoe's in it. Like, basically it pretty much became, if Garfield and Maguire aren't in it, we riot. It's like how do you do it without them? So it's a lot of what Spider-Man had been trying to cover up, we figured out before. it was still impressive the way it all turned out. But I had no idea that we were going to get a Joker in this film.
Yeah.
And you know, is that something you are looking forward to going into the future? Is potentially seeing the Joker as a big villain for Batman?
I mean, Joker is his most iconic villain. It's like it's hard to have a Batman without a Joker, just because like of how iconic they are as a duo. But the problem is like again, like we've seen so many Jokers. Like I even referenced Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, which is a Joker that doesn't even have his own Batman at this point. You know, we had Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, Jared Leto, and like all that. That I'm interested in seeing it, but I want them to do something different with it. I like the idea of what they did with that deleted scene where he's more of like someone like a Hannibal Lecter to Batman, like how he gives him information and helps him in that type of way. Of course, you know, if they want to make him a primary villain, cool. I think Matt Reeves said like that's not the intent. That was just more like a little Easter egg and all that. Because there's something else I wanted to talk about, but I don't know. I guess this might be a good part to talk about. Is just like, while I appreciate the groundedness of this film, I still want to see a Batman film that embraces the fantastical parts of Batman. It's like I want to see villains like Poison Ivy or Clayface or Mr. Freeze and see them brought to their fullest potential. Because one thing with Christopher Nolan is like they redid like a lot of characters to fit in a realistic tone. Like instead of Ra's al Ghul being immortal, the story of Ra's al Ghul was immortal. Or like Bane not having the toxins that make him super buff and all that. So like, while it'd be interesting to see Joker and all that, I want to see more villains that like we haven't really got to see in the past, or characters that deserve a redo. Because Batman has one of the greatest rogues gallery ever. The only one who may possibly compete is Spider-Man. And it's just like, if you're going to keep Batman in a groundedness, there's only so many villains you can use without like really reshaping who those characters are to fit in your style of films.
Well, Matt Reeves has expressed interest in using Mr. Freeze as a villain, which is great.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But like he even said too, like he brought up how like, you know, there's a way to do it groundedness, but like I want to see like that fantastical Mr. Freeze. Like I don't want it to be too real. You know, I want to see like a freeze gun ray or something like that. You know, stuff we've been longing to see for so many years. You know, and if they want to do it their way, it's their film. And like I said, like there's probably going to be another Batman franchise in a few years that may give us that. But it's still just like, you know, I'm tired of sitting here waiting. I want to see these characters. I want to see like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze, but like done right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because they crossed a line in Batman and Robin with how goofy the villains can get, and you're absolutely right. They did have to really remake up a lot of these villains in Nolan's universe to make them fit within his vision. And I think there's a world where we can get a Mr. Freeze that feels like something maybe out of the animated series. I mean, let's not forget the Marvel Cinematic Universe started with Iron Man, which, apart from the fact that he has, you know, an iron suit and can fly really cool, is pretty grounded in a realistic world.
That is true.
It took them 3 films to get to holy crap, here's a guy with a hammer who can shoot lightning. So it's not, I don't think it's not outside the realm of possibility at all to have a Mr. Freeze with a ray gun. But I do think that getting audiences invested in a realistic world to start, a world they can believe is theirs to begin with, is a great way to start a franchise.
It is. It's just I'm afraid of it. Like I said, like seeing characters done differently to fit in their style. That's the thing I'm afraid of, because like some characters can work. Like I think Dark Knight works because like Joker and Two-Face are characters that can be done like that. But like I said, with like Ra's al Ghul or Bane, it's like they had to really change who those characters are to fit their style. And while you bring up the MCU and Marvel, it's like I do agree with you. It started grounded, but like I think how that also helped is that each character had their own like separate part of the universe that operated on their own rules. You know, it's like it's not like Iron Man himself in the third film got the magic hammer. You know, that's a different character altogether in his own thing. Whereas this is we're focusing on one character's journey and the characters that interact with him. Because even if you look at Iron Man's films, it's like a lot of those characters, again, they suffer from the same problem. Like the Mandarin had a lot changed with him even before. I'm not even talking about the Trevor Slatery twist, but like even before that, the way they had to rechange the Mandarin a bit more of like a realistic terrorist as opposed to like this guy with like 10 magic rings that are like alien origin and all that before it got retconned by Shang-Chi.
Yeah, it's a difficult line to straddle. You know, when do you get too goofy, too unrealistic, or just I'll just say in this case too goofy, because obviously again, yeah, I'm okay with Mr. Freeze having a freeze ray. I am not okay with him making puns every 5 seconds.
And this is also, I think, a thing to bring up is like it's hard to please every fan because like some fans like the grounded realness, some fans want the fantastical. So it's just a matter of like Matt Reeves can only do like what he wants to do and hopes he can make as many people happy as possible. And I know someday down the road I'll get like all the characters I want the way I want them, but you know, it's just like right now it's just that sitting and waiting for it. It's the hard part. It's not like where like we've had great versions of characters in the past, like what's a good one? Like if they don't use Joker, you know, like I still got Jack Nicholson, I got Heath Ledger, I got Mark Hamill and all that. But we haven't seen these characters yet done in like a good way. Because like I said, the only Mr. Freeze we have is Arnold Schwarzenegger. The only Poison Ivy we have is Uma Thurman. Love Uma Thurman, thought she could have done a great job, but the way they handled it in that film didn't work for me. And even with Bane, it's just like you either get him as a dumb brute or you get a change of his origin and powers and abilities that I personally didn't even recognize him as Bane. They could have called him Bob, in my opinion, and it would have made no difference. Say he was a reference to the character in the '89 Batman film.
And you're so right. It's frustrating because on paper, Uma Thurman is the perfect Poison Ivy. And yeah, unfortunately, that paper was the script for Batman and Robin, which is not good.
No.
Okay. I'm going to kind of jump over this next topic because we've kind of already talked about how this film straddles the line between PG-13 and R. I know a lot of people were disappointed when it was announced it would be PG-13. I wasn't, because this film clearly proves that you can have that really dark tone and that sense of dread without having to push it, because to get an R, it would have had to have been blood, like super violence, like
nudity, cursing, you know, blood, guts, and all that. I feel like you can do R, but you have to use it right. Deadpool works because it fits his character, it fits his world. But if you want to see a film that had an R rating and just abused it, watch 2019's Hellboy.
Ooh, or don't.
Yeah, don't watch it. Don't. I'm just saying that's how you get an R rating, but don't use it properly. You know, and I felt like this film did a really good job of pushing where it can go with PG-13. Because honestly, like watching it, you could even, if you didn't know it was PG-13, you could come in there and say like, could this be R-rated? Because like it does do a lot of dark things in this film. We see a lot of graphic stuff, like especially with the Riddler and how he tortured a lot of the corrupt politicians and police officers. It's very gruesome and brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of blend this in with the next topic, which is what kind of non-Batman influences do you see in this film? I see a lot of Marvel's Daredevil in this film,
Mm-hmm.
but the difference between Marvel's Daredevil and Batman is that Daredevil does cross that line, and it's a Netflix show. You know, people get stabbed in that one, and you see it. One guy gets stabbed through the head. Kingpin smashes someone's head in with a car door, and the sound effects are just gruesome.
Mm-hmm.
Batman is brutal, but it never goes that far. But it does, I think, have that grounded feeling that Daredevil had in that first season of a corrupt city, and a character who I think Matt Murdock and Bruce Wayne's in this film are a lot alike in that they never turn off. They're almost always in superhero mode, even when they're, on the street. They just can't turn it off. But also, and you pointed out earlier, this is the most noir Batman we've had, and that just comes from not only the dark tone, but literally the darkness of this film. I would be fascinated to see in the future if there is a black and white version of this.
I think it's already so dark. With a black and white version, like, make it more difficult to see everything, literally.
It could. It depends on how they do it. But yeah, this is Batman noir all the way, and also just I think like Batman Begins before it, and parts of The Dark Knight. You could just go into this and say this is a crime film that just happens to have a masked vigilante in it.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff that you could say, like you can look at and say, oh, that comes from The Godfather, like with these crime families and who's the rat.
Totally. Yeah, because like we've been saying, like, this is like the most detective like Batman has ever been. So it definitely gives it that noir feeling, like those old like black and white classic Hollywood type of films, I believe from the 60s. I don't remember the era.
Or even earlier.
Okay, yeah. You're more knowledgeable about that aspect. But like even what I was saying earlier with like Riddler's a lot of sense of like Saw or like something like that, because like some of those traps, I think there was literally like a trap that was very similar to that one that like clamps on your head on one of the people or whatever, and like the bomb on the guy's neck that would go off at random and all that. Like, if they had that art, like they could do the body torture if they wanted to, but like they don't go that far. Like, we don't see any of it, but it had a lot of that inspiration. And definitely just a lot of like crime thriller feels. And honestly, this film just felt like one of those independent movies that Robert Pattinson has made for so many years, just with a bigger budget. Because it doesn't have that Hollywood feel to it, like it's trying to sell toys or like set up a franchise. It just felt like a film that the director was passionate about. It's a story he wanted to tell. It just felt like it also had that bigger budget that allowed it to give it more to it, if you know what I mean.
The only part I would say that feels like a big Hollywood film is where they do the hard pivot at the end, where it turns from a detective story to all of a sudden the Riddler has bombs set up everywhere and his goons at the stadium, and then it became a much more sort of Hollywood feeling Batman film. But that was and apart from that, in the car chase, those are like the only two big action scenes in the film, which is really impressive for a superhero movie today.
Yeah, and you could probably assume maybe that was a studio thing. Like they needed like those scenes to really sell the movie in trailers and all that.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Batmobile scene, the car chase, was a Matt Reeves thing, just because, even in a grounded Batman movie, like the Batmobile is just, it's so iconic for the character. You've got to show it off.
Yeah, you can't have them without it.
So, yeah, it's definitely, very different and got a lot of interesting influences. So we've already talked about one of the things that sets this movie apart, and that is that, most DC and these Marvel projects right now are focusing on interconnecting storylines and characters and making one big world. This doesn't. And with everything else that's going on in Marvel and DC films, as much as we appreciate, some of those films, is it a little bit refreshing to see a superhero film that is meant to stand on its own without outside influences from other characters and stories?
Yeah. I think it is it's easy for me to keep up with a lot of these like extended universes. I follow a lot of movie news sites. I watch all these movies. I see videos talking about them. But like when I try to introduce something like this to casual fans, like my parents or, like talk to a friend, they're just so confused with like everything. It's just like, I had to watch 20 films just to watch Avengers Endgame to get everything. And while I do feel like a lot of superhero movies, Marvel films in Phase 4 have been more self-contained, like Shang-Chi and all that, it still was a universe film. So like seeing this film just be all like, you just need this film. You don't need to watch anything else. If you want to watch the other stuff, good. But like, here's just a good story. Because I think I brought this up, I did bring this up earlier, was just like, the only thing that really felt like it was like trying to be a universe is, like I said, the Penguin, how it definitely felt like he was there to set up his HBO Max TV series, which they have already confirmed and have been talking about and all that, which is also said to be getting an R rating because it's going streaming as opposed to a big budget movie and all that. But other than that, it's just nice where I can just sit down, watch a movie, go home, and don't have to, like worry about anything else. I could just show my parents it without them having to see anything else.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to look out for a ton of Easter eggs and being like, oh, how is this going to set up, the next 3 films that are all starring different characters? Like,
yeah.
Again, this film's one major character Easter egg is the Joker. And you don't need to have seen other Batman films to get it. Like, people just know who the Joker is. And just like, oh, that's the Joker. And maybe we'll see the Joker. That's it. Like,
yeah, because even like pre MCU, there's always been stuff like that where films have tried to throw in hints at sequels, whether they panned out or not. So like that's not even like something mainstream audiences aren't used to. Because trying to think of an example that actually paid off, but I can only think of examples of sequel begging that never happened, like Super Mario Brothers, Master of the Universe, and all that. I can't think of any that paid off.
Yeah. Outside of the MCU, even in comic book films, I think one of the biggest story setups I can think of was Dark Phoenix in the X-Men, and that did not pay off. And I'm talking about the first time it happened.
Yeah.
Actually, didn't pay off either time.
Well, actually, they did do that a little bit in Batman Begins with the Joker card at the end.
Yeah, they did.
But even that just felt like a random, like, even if it was standalone, that felt like it could have just been like a nice little nod and not like a direct setup for a sequel.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree. It's every now and then you have to have something that stands outside of the big picture. And I think that nope, that's a completely different train of thought. I'll leave that for a little second. Just because you're absolutely right. And during the Spider-Man Spoilercast, Kyle brought up that whole thing of, when he was sitting in the, again, this is another No Way Home spoiler for, want to hear this. When Kyle was sitting in the movie theater and Matt Murdock shows up, and Kyle said the only reason that he knew it was Daredevil was because he'd heard. He'd never watched Daredevil. It wasn't a big thing for him. So that burden of audiences to digest every bit of content you have is so tough if you didn't get to start from the beginning like we did, or you just don't invest yourself in it. the way that you and I do, can be so tough. I had that same problem with Boba Fett when characters showed up in Boba Fett, and people were like, "Oh, here's so and so from Clone Wars," and blah blah, and I'm just like, I don't know who this is.
Yeah. What was I gonna say about that? I had something I was gonna add to that, but now I can't remember. What I was gonna say, it's also especially harder now because like it's not just like you can sit and watch a 2-hour movie to get caught up. You now have to sit through seasons of TV shows with stuff like even WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and all that. And like you just mentioned, like the modern Star Wars is so dependent on the Clone Wars series and Star Wars Rebels that it's a lot of content you have to watch just to understand the stuff that's going on in the current thing you're watching.
So, and that could happen with this film, with the Penguin spinoff series, and then also it was going to be a GCPD spinoff series, but it's since been retooled to be an Arkham Asylum sort of horror show series.
Yeah.
So I hope that they don't ask audiences to, depend on seeing all of that to understand what's going to happen in the next Batman film, because that going to HBO does mean exactly what you said. Because it's streaming on HBO, they can push for even more violent, more graphic stuff than you can do in a PG-13 film, just because that's what people expect from HBO.
Yeah. And even to the point for something, I don't know why, but I just want to bring this up. I don't think it's going to connect. Like how Colin Farrell was saying he fought long and hard to give the Penguin his signature cigar, which in the movies they were like, no, you can't do that or else we'll get R rating. But in the TV show, it's something he can have.
I did not even know that.
He fought long and hard
funny.
with Warner Brothers. He fought long and hard with Warner Brothers because he wanted to give the Penguin like his cigar, but like they were afraid that would push the R rating, that they couldn't allow him to smoke it for some reason or whatever.
That's interesting because I could have sworn that the attitude with smoking in films is it's generally reserved for villains at this point.
Yeah. I just think,
but what do I know?
Maybe it's also, I don't know all the details. Maybe it's just because the film was already so dark. If they were to keep adding too much to it, that it would have really made it hard to keep it PG-13. They're just like, you got so much going on. You can only have one or the other. I don't know all the details of it. I'm not Colin Farrell. I'm not Warner Brothers.
That's an interesting bit of trivia. I'm going to have to look that up and see what's going on with that.
Yeah.
Speaking of streaming, this is kind of a minor topic, but this film I saw on Twitter sort of reignited the cinema versus streaming discourse, because over the last year, particularly from Warner Brothers, we've gotten used to day and date releases on HBO Max, and they ended that this year. And the Batman is one of their first big films to debut exclusively in theaters before going to HBO. Now it's going to, from what I have seen, it's going to be on HBO Max on April 19th, which is not that far off. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think is a good way to balance out a big film like this being in cinemas and on streaming? Because Gary and I talked about it a couple episodes ago, and I think we found the good balance. But I want to know what your take is on that.
See, that's the difficult thing, because it's just like there's a lot of decisions that go into that. It's not just like a simple solution, because like no matter what way you go, it's going to affect people in Warner Brothers. It's going to affect people at HBO Max, whatever. I do think that like it's best to, at least in my personal opinion, I think I would still like that it goes to theaters initially, just because like these are big budget movies and you need to make sure like they're getting their money and all that. And also I feel like it helps create, things we can all come together for. It's hard to really like connect with people on movies when you're in your own home watching them on your TV. Because like as someone who has been going to movies for years, there's been no greater experience than being in Avengers Endgame and just hearing me and my fellow nerds cheer for the portal scene, hear us cheer for Captain America lifting Mjolnir and all that. I've even brought a couple of people, I think, to see Spider-Man No Way Home, and while it was dead quiet, they loved the experience of like everybody unanimously cheering for Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. That's something you just can't recreate when you're by yourself, because like, you know, that's just you. You want to know that you're not out. You're not. It's not just you. You have all these fellow nerds. So that, and I do think like, I don't know. I personally don't have a preference or an idea of what's the best way to go about when it should be released. I don't think it should be side by side. I do think there needs to be some time between it, but like that's just a difficult question I can answer at this moment.
That's basically the solution that Gary and I came up with, because that's what Paramount did with most of their big releases last year. Was they would start them in the movie theater and give them a 45-day window and then bring them to their streaming service. I think a 45-day window is a solid amount of time, because that's, you know, unless your movie is gigantic, like it's an event, unless it's an Avengers level thing where it's going to still be playing in theaters like 3 months down the road. 45 days is a good amount of time for a movie to run its course, to attempt to make back its budget before you move it over to streaming services. The only time that I would say day and date streaming is a good thing is if we were to go back to those sort of like early 2020 days where it was just like, don't go outside, don't socialize. You know, if we hit that sort of point again where like it's literally a danger to go to a movie theater because we don't know how deadly this pandemic can be. But at this point, you know, playing it safe, being smart, you know, I think it's a good time to be getting back into movie theaters if you're smart about it.
And honestly, I think I agree with you on that. I think 45 days is a very good window, because word of mouth is always what sells a film too. Like, you can put as much promotion in you want as possible, but like, you know, people want that feeling of like, oh, what did you think of that? You know, like, we should go see it, all that. Because I think by doing it side by side, it hurts a film financially. I think that's the problem at the moment.
It's been a problem for some films. And if you want to hear more about that, if you're listening to this, Gary and I talk about that in our look back at 2021 episode, and we see which ones did get hurt by that. It's very fascinating looking at those numbers.
Okay.
But yeah. So I skipped over something. I know I did. Oh, I did. I totally skipped over this. So at this point, are you at all curious to see what the Ben Affleck original sort of storyline might have been?
Well, honestly, whenever there's stories like this, I'm always fascinated of what could have been, because that's a theme throughout Hollywood. Because like every film, there's always going to be potentially different versions of it. I think there was like 14 versions of Freddy versus Jason before it came out. There was a different version of Godzilla before we got the 1998 Matthew Broderick. There was supposed to be a sequel to Batman and Robin, which was going to feature, like, I believe, Scarecrow and other characters. But specifically on the Ben Affleck version of Batman, I think I would have been definitely very, very interested to see it. I don't remember where I heard it from, but like I do remember hearing a story that like the plot was going to be something along the lines of Arkham, with Batman trapped in the asylum and interacting with so many of his iconic characters. And I think this could also have gone back to my grounded versus fantastical, that since that film is established in a world with like fish people and aliens and gods, that they could have used any characters that they wanted. And to see the possibility to see all these different characters, I think could have been really, really interesting, and what I personally would have wanted to see. Like I mentioned, like characters that deserve a second chance. Now, granted, you also run the risk of like would it have been bad? Because like Ben Affleck has written and directed good movies, but every filmmaker has bad movies, and it's like, would this have also been at the era where like they wanted everything to be very Zack Snyder-esque, where everything had that darker, grittier tone, or would it be like more modern DCEU with like Shazam and Aquaman and all of that? So I guess to make a long story short, since I see myself as one who likes to ramble, yes, I would have been interested to see it, very much, just for what it could have done differently than this film.
Yeah, I agree. I'm certainly curious as to what it ultimately would turn out to be. I agree. Ben Affleck has written and directed some great films. I don't think it would have suffered because of him. Studio meddling might have been a thing. Some of these DCEU films have tragically suffered from studio meddling. Most obvious, of course, being Justice League. But I'm ultimately glad that we did get a good Batman film out of this.
Yeah. That's the only thing you can really wish for at this point. It's just a good movie that you can enjoy. It's like, do you take the risk and say, I want the other version, but it ends up being worse? Or the chance it could be better. It's like, you never know.
And on a similar note, I think that the Batman is a perfect template for what Marvel can be looking at with Daredevil down the line, because a lot of fans have been worried, with Daredevil coming back to the MCU, oh, if it's not going to be as dark and gritty and violent as it was on Netflix, then it's not going to work. Well, Warner Brothers just proved that you can do a dark and gritty film that doesn't have to push the boundaries with R-rated levels of violence and still feel, dark and brooding and scary. It works.
It can work. I definitely agree. There's actually, I'm sure you probably talked about this in another one, at least for news purposes, but how they're going to start bringing the Netflix Marvel shows into Disney Plus. And it could really say a lot on where they categorize it, because Disney Plus has a section that's canon to MCU Marvel stuff that's not canon. And like, the question is, where is they going to put them? Because if they put them in canon section, it establishes those shows exist. And if they don't, then it's just like, all right, I guess they're going to do a new take on the character. I definitely want to see Daredevil gritty like that. It's just a matter of making sure it also doesn't conflict too much with the tone when he eventually interacts with the Avengers and all that.
We actually literally talked about that last week, and I wouldn't, as someone who's seen all of those shows, I wouldn't mind if they were canonized. But again, for people who haven't seen those shows, and I have a lot of friends who haven't, either because they feel like they are going to be too violent or they just didn't invest the time into them. It's a big ask to ask people, watch all this stuff to understand who Matt Murdock is and all these other characters. So
and I'm in that same boat. I haven't watched the shows, and at this point, it is daunting, because I think I brought this up in the No Way Home discussion. It's just like, you got to watch Daredevil season 1, and then you got to watch Jessica Jones season 1, and then you got to jump here and jump there, because it's not just like a straight show and all that. Like, when you have to jump between seasons for a show, that's what makes it more difficult.
But if they do reboot, either way, if they reboot or they continue from where Matt Murdock left off, it is possible, everyone, to give him that edge while keeping it fairly family friendly. I won't say the Batman is too family friendly, but it's family friendly enough if you are in the double digits age, I'd say. Don't take your 5-year-old to see this, though. They might get nightmares.
No.
So I think it's time to start wrapping things up here. So Travis, what are your final thoughts on the Batman?
Final thoughts. It's definitely like, I'm really happy with how it turned out, because like I said, like with so many Batman films, I just went in with like no expectations. I just went and see what it was and was pleasantly surprised. It does the best at telling a Batman story and not this director's version of the Batman story. I'm very interested to see where they kick it in a sequel, what characters they want to bring in, what characters they want to bring back, what they want to expand upon, and all that. But as a standalone film, it was really, really well done. And like, despite it being 3 hours, there's only a couple parts where you feel that, but for the most part, it really flows well. And if you're a Batman fan, definitely check it out. If you're not, I still say it's worth it, at least a looking at and seeing if it's something you would be interested in.
I love your point that this is a nearly 3-hour film that flows incredibly well, because we're at this point used to the 3-hour superhero film being reserved for Endgame and No Way Home, something that just absolutely stretches the bounds of how epic you can make your film. And the Batman is not, it's not epic. It's not this great grand, world is about to end type of story. It's a crime story. It's just a simple crime story. But they got that script down so tight that it works. And I'm very excited to see and hope to see this Batman story continue, because I love the lessons that he learns about vengeance is wrong, and I need to, I may have set the wrong example and I can do better. I would honestly, and I know this is I know this kind of goes against like the philosophy of Batman even existing, but like I would love to see like Bruce Wayne actually start to think like, maybe I can also spend some of my money on actually putting it back into programs that help people, because that's part of why crime exists in the first place, is as money is being distributed in all the wrong places.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know that almost be comically just silly if that's what ultimately solves it, and we don't need a Batman anymore. But
well, like you were saying, it's just like a lot of the problems nowadays that like people are stopping stuff as it's happening, but they're not looking at the roots of the problems. So I think that's something I would definitely be interested in seeing in a sequel, is because this film definitely established right now he doesn't want that Bruce Wayne persona. And then at the end, like when he's like saving the people, he's just like, I got to make more of a difference as just that. And that, while it would be comical if you just threw money at it, it would all go away. I think with a grounded tone, it can really say a lot that it could at the very least make an impact on it. It kind of going in something completely different is, I feel like it could be like the Lorax, where it's just like, unless you're willing, it could be a message to the audience and like, you can make a difference without having to be a billionaire with all this stuff. If you just look at like, put more effort into stopping the problems at the sources, as opposed to waiting until something happens to do something.
That's a good comparison. Yep. That is the Batman. And now it is time for some Batman trivia. And I have fairly confident that you can suss this one out, because you talked about it so much at the beginning. So here we go. So despite the dark and gritty tone of the film, Batman doesn't kill anyone. What other live action cinematic Batman holds this honor? Is it A, Adam West, B, Michael Keaton, C, Val Kilmer, or D, George Clooney?
That's actually a difficult question, because like I haven't rewatched a lot of those films in a long time. I know it's not Michael Keaton because he has, and actually now that I think about it, I'm gonna cross out Val Kilmer because he did accidentally kill Two-Face in Batman Forever. He just threw some points at him, but I know I want to say Adam West, but I feel like that would be too easy of an answer right now. I'm trying to really think it right now. Like if I'm really thinking of George Clooney right now. Did he kill anybody? All right, I got a 50-50 chance, I believe. I'm going to go with Adam West because I feel like with that tone of the 60s show that if he were to kill somebody, it would have really messed with the censors of the time.
Well, Travis, your gut was correct before. It is George Clooney.
Adam West killed somebody?
Yep, in Batman the movie, he I can't remember exactly the science behind it because, of course, the science in those ones make no sense. But like,
the disintegrating stuff and all that. Is that
yep.
what you're talking? Dang it! And it's like when you mention it, it's just like, oh yeah, that happened.
You just don't think about it because it's so rare for him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was shocked when I looked back and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's right. George Clooney doesn't kill anybody.
Yeah, because like I was thinking too, like the censors in the 60s were like very strict at that time. That they didn't even allow Two-Face to show up in the show just because of how like dark and serious that character is. That they made an animated DC film a few years ago, Batman versus Two-Face, based on that era of Batman, just to make up for it.
But yeah, it's crazy. Adam West, and I think, obviously they can get away with it because it's like such a on screen, a very non-graphic means of death.
Yeah. And even then they did show that the powders can be brought back to life with all the world leaders. So I think that's also how they got around it a little bit.
So yeah, that is our show for the week. Travis, thank you for joining me to talk about the Batman. Overall, an excellent film. If superhero films are your cup of tea, this is definitely one to see, especially if you like Batman. It's also, I've got to say, it's set a high bar for the rest of the year. I know we've got Doctor Strange, Thor, and Black Panther to look forward to from Marvel, and Shazam to look forward to from DC. So that's a pretty high bar for all of those to meet. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you, Travis. Thank you for watching the show. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Like and follow on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Ben Stahl. This is episode 39 of the Sunday Matinee. Have fun at the movie theaters and have a good day.